It was a warm Friday afternoon when my sister and I found ourselves talking about how quiet the house felt. We had finished our chores early, and the idea of doing something different for the weekend kept circling in our minds. Our cousin's name came up almost instantly. He had always been part of our lives, more than just family. He was a mix of an older brother, a friend, and someone who seemed to quietly understand us without too many words. He was reserved, responsible, and the kind of person who never got into unnecessary drama. That day, we remembered something his mother had told us a week ago, that she and his father would be away for 2 days, leaving him alone at home. It felt like an opportunity we didn't want to miss. The thought of spending time at his place without the usual noise of elders around had its own excitement. We both knew he wouldn't mind because even though he rarely expressed it openly, he always enjoyed our company. He had been a part of so many small but important moments in our lives, helping with schoolwork, mediating our arguments, and being that quiet protector when we were younger. When I suggested to my sister that we should drop by, she smiled instantly, like she had already been thinking the same thing. We called him, expecting a polite but reluctant response, but to our surprise, he agreed right away. He sounded casual, maybe even a little curious about why we wanted to come over. It wasn't unusual for us to visit him, but this felt different. There was a certain freedom in knowing there would be no formalities, no questions from parents, and no watchful eyes. On the way, we talked about how he had changed over the years. He used to be shy to the point where speaking in front of relatives made him nervous, but now he had this calm, steady way of carrying himself. My sister teased that he was probably still the same inside, quiet and thoughtful, but that he had just learned how to hide it better. I didn't disagree. There was something about him that had always been consistent. The way he listened without interrupting, and the way he made you feel like your words mattered. By the time we arrived, the air felt different. Not tense, just lighter. He greeted us with his usual half-smile, the kind that could mean anything from, "I'm happy to see you," to, "I wonder what you two are planning." We didn't have a plan, not really. All we knew was that this wasn't going to be a regular visit. Somewhere in the back of my mind, there was a sense that the day would stand out for reasons I couldn't name yet. We settled in, exchanged a few jokes, and without realizing it, created the perfect setting for something unexpected. That thought lingered quietly, almost like a whisper. Maybe today we'd learn something new about each other. Do you want me to continue with section 2 in the same style? We sat together, talking about random things at first. Funny memories from school, how the neighborhood had changed, and the little things we'd noticed about people we knew. My sister, always the more daring one, suddenly leaned forward and said we should make him do something he had never done for us before. I could see him raise an eyebrow, unsure if she was serious. I added to the suggestion, saying we wanted him to cook for us. Not just make tea or heat leftovers, but actually prepare a meal from scratch like a real host. He froze for a moment, looking at us as if he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. Cooking wasn't something he was known for. In fact, we had never seen him do it. He laughed quietly, shaking his head, saying we'd be better off ordering food. But we both insisted, telling him it was a once-in-a-lifetime cousin challenge and he couldn't refuse. My sister even threatened to tell everyone that he was scared to try. He rolled his eyes, but the corners of his mouth curved into a reluctant smile, the kind that admitted defeat before he even said yes. It became a playful argument, the kind where no one is truly angry but everyone is trying to win. We promised to help, though we secretly planned to make him do most of the work. He eventually agreed, muttering that we'd regret eating whatever came out of the kitchen. The moment he stood up to get started, we followed, pretending to be assistants but mostly distracting him with questions and jokes. He tried to act serious, but every time he burned something slightly or cut vegetables unevenly, we couldn't help laughing. There was something about that shared space, about watching him do something so unfamiliar, that made the whole atmosphere warmer. We weren't just cousins killing time. We were creating a moment that felt personal and unplanned. Every small gesture, passing him the salt, tasting something and giving exaggerated approval, teasing him when he wiped sweat from his forehead, added a layer of closeness we hadn't felt before. It wasn't romantic in the way movies show it. It was quieter, hidden under humor and casual conversation, but it was there. When he finally placed the food in front of us, he stood back like he was bracing himself for criticism. We made a show of tasting it slowly, exchanging dramatic nods, and telling him he might have missed his true calling as a chef. He tried to hide his smile, but it stayed on his face longer than usual. We all knew the meal wasn't perfect, but that wasn't the point. It was about the fact that he had done something just because we'd asked, something outside his comfort zone, and that small effort carried a meaning none of us said out loud. After eating, none of us seemed in a hurry to move. The laughter from earlier faded into a calmer silence, the kind that doesn't feel awkward but instead feels like an invitation to speak honestly. My sister leaned back, talking about moments from years ago when he had quietly stepped in to help us without being asked. How he once stayed up late helping with a school project, how he'd taken the blame when we broke something at a family gathering, how he'd always been the one to check if we were okay when we seemed upset. He tried to brush it off, saying it was nothing, but the way he looked away made it clear he remembered every moment she mentioned. I added my own memory, one I hadn't told him before, about a time when just his presence had made me feel safe during a difficult family argument. He didn't reply immediately, but his expression softened. It was rare to see him like that, unguarded, without the careful composure he usually carried. For a while, we drifted into talking about other things. Dreams we hadn't told many people, little regrets, and what we imagined our futures might look like. It wasn't the kind of conversation you planned. It unfolded naturally, each sentence leading to something more personal. There was an ease in the way he listened, not interrupting, not judging, just being there fully. I noticed how he hesitated before giving his own answers, as if weighing each word carefully. He spoke about the pressure of being the dependable one in the family, about how sometimes people forget that even the reliable ones get tired. My sister and I exchanged a glance, realizing we'd never thought about his life that way before. The person we had always gone to for help had his own quiet struggles, and somehow that made him feel even closer to us, not as a protector or an elder cousin, but as someone human, someone like us. There was a shift I couldn't quite name, but I felt it. The conversation wasn't about food anymore, or even about the day. It was about the kind of connection you don't find often, the kind that makes you see a familiar face in a completely new light. Even the pauses between words felt full, as if nothing needed to be filled with noise. We stayed like that, sharing thoughts and half-smiles, aware that this was a rare kind of closeness we hadn't known we could have. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the way we saw him from that night onward would never be quite the same again. The next morning came quietly, without any rush. We had breakfast together, the kind where no one talks much but the silence feels easy. When it was time to leave, we lingered at the door longer than usual. There was no dramatic goodbye, just a simple exchange of looks that seemed to say more than words could. My sister joked about his cooking one last time, and he rolled his eyes, but his smile stayed as we walked away. Something in that moment felt different, as if an invisible line had been crossed and we all knew it. In the days that followed, our chats became more frequent. He started sending messages out of nowhere, sometimes just a meme, sometimes a question about our day. We found ourselves teasing him more, and he teased back in a way that was lighter than before, as if he was letting us see a side of him he usually kept hidden. Even small interactions, like him asking if we'd eaten or reminding us about something we'd mentioned, carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the way each moment felt intentional, as if we had moved into a different space in our relationship without needing to define it. I realized I was noticing little things about him now. The way his voice softened when he said our names, the way he paused before replying as if making sure his words landed right, the way he seemed more at ease when it was just us. My sister noticed it too, though she never said it outright. We didn't talk about that night openly, maybe because we didn't want to risk breaking the quiet understanding we'd built. What happened wasn't about romance in the loud, obvious way. It wasn't about confessions or promises. It was about discovering a connection that had always been there but had never been given the space to grow. When the house had been full of people, we'd been cousins. But in the absence of everyone else, we'd become something more. Not in title, but in how we understood and valued each other. Looking back, I know that day will always stand out. It wasn't because he cooked for us or because we stayed up talking. It was because, in those hours, we learned each other's unspoken truths. We saw the person behind the role he played in the family, and he saw us as more than just the younger cousins he had to look after. It changed the way we carried each other in our hearts. And though we never named what grew between us, I know it's something that will stay, quietly, for the rest of our lives. Some feelings are so quiet they don't announce themselves until long after the moment has passed. That's how it was with that night. Days turned into weeks, and life went on the way it always had. Family gatherings, routines, the same familiar rhythm. But every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about the way he had looked at us when we left his house, or the tone in his voice when he spoke about things he rarely shared. It was as if my mind had stored that night in a separate drawer, one I opened when I wanted to feel that stillness again. I began to understand that what made it special wasn't the absence of his parents or the meal he cooked. It was the way we had been present with each other in a way we hadn't been before. No distractions, no background noise, no pretending to be versions of ourselves for the sake of others. Just us, stripped down to the truth of who we were to each other. That kind of honesty doesn't come often, even in families. I found myself replaying tiny details. The way his smile lingered longer than usual, like he was holding on to something unspoken. The way my sister's teasing carried an undertone of affection she never admitted out loud. The way the air seemed heavier in a good way, as if time had slowed for us. Those moments became a quiet reminder that closeness isn't built in grand gestures, but in small, steady acts that reveal more than words ever could. There was also a kind of bittersweetness to it. I knew that what we had shared was rare, and rare things aren't always meant to be repeated. Some experiences are meant to live once and then remain as they are, untouched by the changes that time brings. Maybe that's why we never tried to recreate it. We didn't need to. The memory had already done its work. It had shifted something inside us, and that was enough. In the end, it wasn't about cousins or roles or even definitions. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most meaningful relationships exist in spaces that don't fit neatly into categories. That night gave me a glimpse of that truth. It left me with a quiet gratitude, not just for him, but for the rare alignment of time, place, and feeling that allowed us to see each other differently. And even now, when life pulls us back into our usual patterns, I know that somewhere beneath the surface, that understanding is still there, unspoken but unshakable. Sometimes the mind returns to a memory not because it is unfinished, but because it refuses to fade. That night with him became one of those quiet constants in the background of my thoughts, surfacing without warning. It would happen in the middle of a crowded room when someone laughed in a way that reminded me of him, or when I caught the faint smell of the tea he had made. These weren't deliberate attempts to remember. They were fragments, uninvited yet welcome, slipping into the spaces of everyday life. What surprised me most was how the memory carried no weight of expectation. There was no longing for more, no restless search for what it could have been. It was enough to know it had happened, and that it had left a mark deep enough to stay. I began to realize that some connections are not meant to be followed. They are meant to be acknowledged, respected, and held quietly, like a delicate photograph you never risk damaging. Every so often I would see him across a room at a family gathering. His face calm as ever, his manner unchanged to anyone else. But I would catch that flicker in his eyes, a recognition, a shared history neither of us needed to voice. It wasn't a secret in the traditional sense. It was simply something private, belonging only to those who were there in that moment. My sister noticed it too, I could tell, though she never mentioned it. We all carried it in silence, each in our own way. The more time passed, the more I valued the rarity of it. People search for relationships that make them feel understood, but what we had was even more unusual. An unspoken understanding born in an ordinary night that had turned extraordinary only because we were truly present with each other. There was no script, no plan, no shaping of events to fit an idea of closeness. It had happened naturally, and that was why it felt so pure. In a way, it became a quiet reminder to me of how life works. You can plan moments and chase certain feelings, but the ones that stay are often the ones you never see coming. That night taught me that connection isn't always loud, dramatic, or tied to a declaration. It can be gentle, contained in the space between words, and still powerful enough to change how you see someone forever. And so, without ever naming it, we carried it forward. A silent thread woven into the fabric of our lives, invisible to everyone else but unbreakable to us.